You wake up exhausted even after 8 hours of sleep. You snap at people you love for no apparent reason. You feel like you're living someone else's life, going through the motions but never feeling fully alive. You might think this is just stress, just modern life, just the way things are. But Carl Jung knew better. He discovered that within each of us lies a hidden force he called the shadow. Everything we've rejected about ourselves, every emotion we've deemed unacceptable, every desire we've buried to fit in. And here's what's terrifying. Your shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger. It operates from the depths of your unconscious, sabotaging your relationships, derailing your goals, and slowly destroying the life you're trying so hard to build. The person you've tried to be, the good one, the nice one, the successful one, might actually be a prison that's keeping your authentic self locked away. Today, we're going deep into Jung's most dangerous insight, that the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge are the very parts controlling your life. This isn't about becoming a worse person, it's about becoming a whole person, because until you meet your shadow, you'll never truly know who you are. Carl Jung understood that the psyche naturally divides itself into conscious and unconscious parts. The shadow represents everything about yourself that your conscious mind has rejected, not because these qualities are inherently evil, but because they were deemed unacceptable by your family, society, or your own moral standards. Jung observed that we don't eliminate these rejected parts. We repress them into the unconscious, where they continue to operate outside our awareness. The shadow contains not just negative traits, but also positive qualities that we've disowned. Creativity we've called impractical, assertiveness we've labeled as aggression, spontaneity we've dismissed as irresponsible. Jung called this process shadow projection. When we unconsciously attribute our own repressed qualities to others, which explains why we have intense emotional reactions to certain people or behaviors. The person who irritates you most might be reflecting your own disowned shadow material. What makes the shadow dangerous is not its content, but its unconscious nature. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Your shadow doesn't just influence your behavior. It can completely hijack your conscious intentions, causing you to act in ways that contradict your values and sabotage your goals. Meet Sarah, a 29-year-old marketing director who has built her entire identity around being the good one. She's the daughter who never caused problems, the student who always followed rules, the employee who never challenges authority, the friend who always says yes. Sarah prides herself on being positive, accommodating, and conflict avoidant. She believes anger is destructive, selfishness is wrong, and that nice people don't have dark thoughts. But Sarah has a secret she doesn't even admit to herself. Sometimes, late at night, she fantasizes about quitting her job dramatically, telling off her demanding boss, and pursuing the photography career she abandoned because it wasn't practical. She has vivid dreams where she's powerful, confident, even aggressive, dreams that disturb her so much she tries to forget them immediately upon waking. Sarah's relationships are all surface-level pleasant, but lack real intimacy because she's terrified that if people saw her authentic thoughts and feelings, they would reject her. She finds herself inexplicably attracted to difficult people, those who express the anger and authenticity she's repressed. What Sarah doesn't realize is that her relentless niceness isn't making her happy, it's making her invisible, even to herself. Her shadow contains not just the anger she's afraid of, but the creativity, passion, and authentic power she needs to build a life that actually fulfills her. Sarah's shadow formation began in childhood, with a critical mother who praised only compliance and a father who withdrew whenever emotions ran high. Sarah learned early that acceptance required perfection, that love was conditional on being good, and that certain parts of herself were simply not allowed. When she showed anger as a child, she was told she was being difficult. When she expressed creative impulses, she was redirected toward more practical pursuits. When she asserted her needs, she was labeled selfish. So Sarah learned to split herself in half, the acceptable self that could be loved, and the unacceptable self that had to be hidden away. But Jung understood that what we don't integrate consciously will express itself unconsciously. Sarah's repressed anger doesn't disappear, it emerges as passive aggression, sudden irritability she can't explain, and a tendency to attract drama into her life. Her suppressed creativity doesn't vanish, it shows up as depression, a sense of meaninglessness, and chronic dissatisfaction with her successful career. Her disowned authenticity doesn't die, it manifests as feeling like a fraud, imposter syndrome, and the exhausting effort of maintaining a persona that isn't really her. The shadow always finds a way to express itself, but when it operates unconsciously, it becomes destructive rather than creative. Jung identified the specific mechanism by which the shadow operates through what he called autonomous complexes, parts of the psyche that act independently of conscious control. Sarah's people-pleasing complex automatically activates whenever conflict arises, causing her to abandon her own needs without conscious choice. Her perfectionist complex kicks in whenever she faces potential criticism, driving her to overwork and over-prepare to an unhealthy degree. Her self-sabotage complex emerges whenever she gets close to success, causing her to procrastinate or make inexplicable mistakes at crucial moments. These complexes operate like separate personalities within her psyche, each with their own agenda. The shadow's influence becomes visible in what Jung called projections. Sarah finds herself intensely irritated by aggressive people because they remind her of her own repressed anger. She's fascinated by authentic individuals who express themselves freely because they embody the spontaneity she's disowned. She unconsciously seeks out dramatic relationships because they provide the emotional intensity her controlled conscious life lacks. The mechanism is insidious. The more Sarah tries to be purely good and positive, the more her shadow compensates by creating chaos, attraction to difficult people, and inexplicable self-destructive behavior. Her shadow isn't trying to hurt her, it's trying to restore psychological balance by forcing her to acknowledge the wholeness she's been denying. Sarah's breakthrough came during what she later called the worst meeting of my career. Her boss was berating the team for a project delay that wasn't their fault, speaking to them with condescension and disrespect. Sarah felt the familiar response rising, apologize, smooth things over, take responsibility that wasn't hers, but something different happened. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt a surge of pure, clean anger, not the passive-aggressive resentment she usually experienced, but clear, justified rage at being treated poorly. Instead of suppressing it, something made her pause and actually feel it fully. The anger felt powerful, clarifying, almost electrical. And in that moment of integration, Sarah spoke up. Not aggressively, not rudely, but with a clarity and strength she'd never accessed before. "That's not accurate, and it's not fair to the team," she said calmly. The room went silent. Her boss was taken aback, her colleagues were surprised, but Sarah felt more authentic than she had in years. After the meeting, instead of feeling guilty or anxious as she expected, she felt energized and whole. That evening, for the first time in months, she picked up her camera and took photos until midnight. By confronting her repressed anger consciously, Sarah had unlocked access to other shadow qualities, her creativity, her authenticity, her personal power. She realized that her shadow wasn't her enemy, it was the key to becoming who she really was. I want you to pause and examine your own shadow. Think about the people who irritate you most. What qualities do they display that trigger such strong reactions? Those triggers often point directly to your own repressed shadow material. Consider the aspects of yourself you've worked hardest to hide or overcome. What parts of your personality were criticized or rejected when you were young? What emotions do you consider inappropriate or unacceptable? Here's the deeper question Jung would ask. What would you do if you knew no one was watching? What would you create, say, or become if you didn't have to maintain your current image? Your shadow contains not just the parts of you that others might judge negatively, but also the authentic power, creativity, and vitality you've been afraid to express. The goal isn't to act out every impulse or abandon all social boundaries, but to consciously acknowledge and integrate these aspects of yourself. Comment below and share one quality you've been trying to hide or suppress, not to confess or shock anyone, but to practice the radical act of acknowledging your wholeness. Sometimes the first step toward integration is simply naming what we've been denying. Jung's approach to shadow integration involves what he called active imagination, consciously engaging with shadow material rather than repressing it. Sarah began working with a Jung-trained therapist who helped her recognize the difference between acknowledging shadow impulses and acting them out destructively. The process started with dream work, paying attention to the parts of herself that appeared in dreams as other people, the aggressive figures, the wild creative types, the powerful beings. These were all aspects of her own psyche seeking integration. Sarah learned to dialogue with these inner figures, understanding what they wanted and what gifts they brought. The healing process required Sarah to practice expressing previously repressed emotions in healthy ways. She started setting boundaries at work, not aggressively but firmly. She began pursuing photography again, not as a hobby but as a serious creative practice. She allowed herself to feel and express anger when it was appropriate, discovering that conscious anger was actually a force for justice and self-protection, not destruction. Most importantly, Sarah learned that shadow work isn't about becoming a different person, it's about becoming a whole person. The goal wasn't to eliminate her kindness or consideration for others, but to balance these qualities with self-respect, authenticity, and personal power. Jung called this process individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. 6 months after her breakthrough, Sarah's entire life had transformed, but not in the dramatic way she'd feared. She hadn't become aggressive or selfish. She'd become integrated. At work, she was known for her directness and creative problem-solving. She still maintained positive relationships with colleagues, but they were based on mutual respect rather than her constant accommodation. She had difficult conversations when necessary, set clear boundaries, and found that people actually respected her more, not less. Her photography had evolved from a suppressed hobby into a thriving side business that brought her deep satisfaction. She was creating work that was authentic, powerful, sometimes even challenging, exactly the kind of expression she'd been afraid of. Her romantic relationships improved dramatically because she was no longer attracting people who needed to fix her, or whom she needed to fix. Instead, she was drawing partners who were interested in the real Sarah, not the perfectly pleasant version she'd performed for years. Most remarkably, Sarah discovered that integrating her shadow hadn't made her a worse person. It had made her a more effective person. Her kindness now came from choice rather than compulsion. Her creativity flowed freely rather than being trapped by perfectionism. Her anger, when it arose, served as valuable information about when her boundaries were being violated. She had learned what Jung meant when he said that the shadow contains not just what we reject about ourselves, but also our unrealized potential. Sarah's story reflects Jung's observation that shadow work is not optional for psychological health, it's essential. In our culture, we're encouraged to present only our positive qualities while hiding anything that might be seen as negative, difficult, or challenging. But this creates what Jung called psychological inflation in the collective. Societies filled with people who are only half-developed, lacking the depth and authenticity that comes from embracing their wholeness. The cost of widespread shadow repression is visible everywhere. The epidemic of depression and anxiety among people who have perfect lives. The prevalence of addictive behaviors as shadow material seeks expression. The attraction to toxic relationships that provide the intensity missing from controlled, conscious lives. Jung understood that individuals who do their shadow work don't just heal themselves, they contribute to the healing of the collective unconscious. When you stop projecting your disowned qualities onto others, you stop participating in the cycle of blame and judgment that divides communities. When you integrate your own capacity for both light and darkness, you become capable of real compassion. Not just for people's acceptable qualities, but for their humanness. The person who has faced their own shadow can hold space for others' complexity without needing them to be perfect or one-dimensional. Shadow work is not a destination but an ongoing process that requires constant attention and courage. Sarah still catches herself falling into old patterns, especially during stressful periods when the temptation to revert to people-pleasing or perfectionism feels strong. The difference now is that she recognizes these patterns as information about her internal state rather than automatic responses she must obey. Sarah developed what she calls her shadow check. When she feels inexplicably irritated, attracted to drama, or compelled to be overly accommodating, she asks herself, what part of me is trying to get my attention right now? This practice helps her address shadow material consciously before it manifests destructively. The ongoing challenge is learning to express shadow qualities constructively rather than destructively. Anger can become healthy boundary setting or passionate advocacy for justice. Selfishness can become healthy self-care and the ability to prioritize your own needs. Creative wildness can become innovative problem-solving and authentic self-expression. Jung understood that the goal isn't to eliminate the shadow but to develop a conscious relationship with it, to become the director of your own psychological drama rather than an unconscious actor in it. Here's the truth Jung understood that most people never learn. The parts of yourself you're most afraid of are often the parts that contain your greatest power. Your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your unrealized potential, your authentic self, the key to becoming whole. Every quality you've repressed, every emotion you've deemed unacceptable, every aspect of yourself you've hidden away is still there, waiting to be integrated into your conscious life. The question isn't whether you have a shadow. The question is whether you'll acknowledge it consciously and integrate it constructively, or whether you'll continue to let it operate unconsciously, sabotaging your relationships, derailing your goals, and keeping you trapped in a half-lived life. Starting today, I challenge you to begin your own shadow work. Notice what triggers you emotionally. That irritation is pointing toward your own repressed material. Pay attention to your dreams. Those strange or disturbing figures are often your shadow seeking integration. Recognize the patterns in your life that seem to repeat despite your best efforts. Your shadow might be creating them to get your attention. In the comments below, share one aspect of yourself you've been trying to hide or suppress. Not to confess or shock, but to practice the radical act of acknowledging your wholeness. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring Jung's insights into the unconscious mind and the journey towards psychological integration, because the goal isn't to become perfect, it's to become real. And you can't be real until you're willing to be whole.